There we go. Okay, thank you for bearing with us there for a second. A couple of housekeeping items, if we can. I wanted to let everyone know that we are trying to record this session. I know there are other folks who are not able to join us this evening, either due to a conflict or because our webinar is full. So that's exciting for us, but we also want to make the information available. With respect to questions and answers, we are going to monitor the questions that you submit via the questions feature at the bottom of your screen. And I think that might be it for housekeeping. I wanted to give a little bit of background about American Specialty and the League of American Bicyclists. 2017 is a really exciting year for us. It marks the 25th year that we have partnered to provide the league clubs with an insurance program. There's a lot of advantages and a lot of things that have changed over the last 25 years. The exposures themselves have changed, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But also, you know, we've worked hard over the years, and the league has worked really hard over the years to create a customized insurance program that provides coverage for the unique exposures that a bike club has. The uniqueness of a bike club's exposure is that a lot of times we're on public roadways, so we can control the actions a lot of times of our club members, but are unable to control the actions of vehicle usage, and that has resulted in some unfortunate claims under the league's program. Another thing that's really unique about the league's insurance program, and I would say most amateur sports organizations, is that there's a really long tail. And what I mean is that you can have an occurrence, an incident that happens today, but not have a claim reported for 3 to 5 years. And after that, it could take another, 10 years for the claim to actually work through the system. So it's important to remember that the coverage that you're buying today, the limits that you're buying today, the insurance company that you're working with today is the insurance company that you want to be there and is going to be the policy and limits and carrier who responds in the event of a claim, any time in the future that dates back to the policy period itself. The other, I would say, advantage of the league's insurance program is the group purchasing power that this group brings to the industry. There's definitely power in numbers. It allows the league and its clubs to secure liability coverage for year-round exposures, which include like club meetings and fundraisers and club rides, more on a blanket basis and pretty broad coverage. So I can tell you, I've been in the industry for about 16, 17 years, and it's really difficult to get coverage for a one-off insured. So someone who, like a cycling club, for example, who's trying to secure coverage but only for their particular club. It's definitely a lot easier to do it when you have a group of individuals coming together and purchasing coverage together. So that is a huge benefit of the league's insurance program. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and jump into the presentation. We're going to try to be respectful of everyone's time and certainly hopefully leave time for questions at the end of the session. We wanted to talk a little bit about who can join the league's insurance program. We really have it open to any nonprofit who is a current member of the League of American Bicyclists and whose primary purpose is to promote or organize bicycling activities. The intent of the policy or the league's program is not to provide coverage for solely, for example, a event organizer who just is having an event and needs coverage for their policy. It's really for those groups who are advocating for cycling and walking throughout the year and their business operations, including their club rides, with the opportunity then to secure coverage for their special events. We're not designed to provide coverage for entities whose primary purpose is mountain biking activities. If your primary purpose of your club is mountain biking, you would not be eligible as a club to secure coverage under the league's program. And then we often get the question relative to whether or not the club has to be incorporated or have tax-exempt status in order to be eligible for coverage, and the answer to that is no. So as Kevin mentioned before, you do have to be a current member of the league to join the insurance program. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the base program, and I'll go into more detail. That includes the general liability and the excess accident medical policy. We're also going to talk a little bit about some optional coverages that are not automatically covered under the league's program but are available to you for purchase if that's something that you're interested in. So your excess liability limits, those limits that sit on top of your general liability policy and increase the overall limit of liability. Again, going back to that point of the limits that you buy today are the limits that you're going to have for a claim that might come in 5-10 years later after today. So directors and officers liability, non-owned and hired automobile liability, we'll go into detail on all of these later, like I said. And then coverages that we currently do not provide on a blanket basis, but our workers' compensation. That's one where we might be able to help you out if you're running into an issue. Property coverage that your club owns and owned automobiles. So if your club has an owned automobile, then you would need to secure coverage outside the league's program. So just to give you an idea of if you're a current member of the league and a member of the insurance program, to give you an idea of who's out there with you, we have over 600 advocacy or bike clubs and advocacy organizations, 491 which have registered as bike clubs, and 191 advocacy organizations. So to me that is proof in the fact that it's a great insurance program that the league has negotiated and made available for its membership. And our retention rate is above, I think it's close to 96-97%. So it's one where I think the clubs feel confident that the coverage is going to be available. The insurance company is going to be there, in the event that there's a loss. And, there's a lot of, I would say, confidence that the league is developing a program that works well for its clubs. We've already talked about group purchasing power. Directors and officers liability coverage, we have about 200 clubs who purchase that coverage. We do offer a non-owned and hired automobile liability policy. About 24 clubs purchase that coverage. And then excess liability, about 15 clubs purchased additional limits. So we'll get into those coverages here shortly. LCIs are covered automatically. You, as an LCI, receive general liability coverage for individual education activities that are conducted in accordance with the league's guidelines. We wanted to talk a little bit about what is the difference from an insurance perspective of a bicycle club and an advocacy organization. How do we define those? And again, for both bicycle clubs and advocacy organizations, coverage applies on a annual basis, on a year-round basis for your club activities. Again, pretty much on a blanket basis, with the exception of a couple of things that we're going to talk about here a little bit later. So an advocacy organization is an entity or a club who is having 26 or fewer club rides annually, with an average of 50 or fewer riders at each of those rides. So if you are a club who has a weekly ride for 52 people, or 52 weeks a year, if you live in one of the amazing locations that allows that, then you would need to register as a bicycle club and not an advocacy organization. Both bicycle clubs and advocacy organizations receive the same insurance coverage. You just pay for it a little differently depending on what category you fall into. Bicycle clubs pay a membership-based premium to join the program, subject to minimum premiums, so it's based on the number of club members that you have at the peak of your season or of your bike club activities. And then advocacy organizations pay premium kind of on a flat basis, and for both bicycle clubs and advocacy organizations, if you're having a special event, which is a ride where you are charging a fee for the ride and it's open to members outside of your club, there's a special event rate that comes into play. And we're going to get into the premiums. I know we've had a couple of questions here about what is the premium, what is the premium? So we'll get into those. Wanted to give a little bit of an overview on the different coverages. We talked about the base program includes general liability and excess accident medical policy coverage. General liability provides protection from the club for bodily injury, property damage, and personal advertising injury type claims. So an example of a bodily injury claim, I have them here on the screen. A cyclist struck a person walking on a trail. That is a bodily injury claim. Or a cyclist fell due to road conditions. That's an example of a bodily injury claim. Property damage liability would be, for example, if a cyclist struck and damaged a vehicle. Or it could be if you are leasing a venue for your annual meeting or celebration or awards banquet or whatever it might be, and when you leave the venue that night, you realize that there's damage to the property. Maybe it's damage to the bathroom stalls. That's property damage liability. Property damage liability is not coverage for losses to one of your members' bicycles, and it's not coverage for property that you own as a club. The policy also includes sports equipment liability, and this again is liability arising from the negligent acts of the club. So an example would be a bicycle stolen from a club's bicycle corral that the club is responsible for supervising. So that in a nutshell is kind of what the general liability is, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about who does it cover. The general liability policy protects the clubs and the advocacy organizations that have enrolled and paid the appropriate premium, which we'll call throughout the session here tonight insured clubs. It also covers your members and your volunteers of an insured club. So let's look at an example of if a member were to be sued individually in a lawsuit because they failed to organize a safe club ride, then that individual would have protection under the general liability policy for those third-party claims of bodily injury, property damage liability, and personal and advertising injury. Your directors and officers, employees, are also insured under the general liability policy. The important thing to remember about the directors and officers is that they're insured for those types of claims that are covered under a general liability policy. So that doesn't include the wrongful acts of the board. So if the board makes a decision that someone disagrees with, again, it has to tie back to the three pieces of the policy, the three incidents that trigger the policy: your bodily injury, property damage, and personal advertising injury. We also provide coverage under the liability policy for your first-time invited guests. The idea is that they may not be a member yet and therefore don't meet the definition above, but they want to come to your club and give it a try. We do recommend that in that case a release of liability waiver is signed by the first-time invited guest. Again, the clubs have coverage for club rides, which are those recreational bicycle rides that are conducted and supervised by the club where no fee is charged. If you're an advocacy organization, when you go into the enrollment process website, you will be asked the question as to whether or not you offer bicycle rides, and if you do, then you would have coverage for those rides with when the appropriate premium is paid. If you don't have bicycle rides, then obviously you don't have coverage for those bicycle rides as an advocacy organization. So it's really important to answer those questions properly and appropriately. Special events are those recreational bicycle rides that you conduct and supervise, but you charge a fee for the ride. So maybe it's for your club members and you've opened it up to the general public. Those events those activities we call special events, and they have to be scheduled to the policy with the appropriate premium paid. And one item to note here, which we say on several occasions throughout this presentation, is that you do not have to count the members that you've already counted in your club premium. So we're not looking to charge a per person fee twice for the same individual, but you'll want to not include your club membership in the numbers that you report for your special events. And then, like I said, the policy provides coverage for your annual exposures, which includes club meetings, fundraisers, time trials where you are not racing, but you're tracking your time against your personal best, bike education courses, the promotion of safe route to school programs, and bike refurbishment. Again, we'll get into that if you purchase the coverage for those exposures. So the policy really is designed to provide coverage for your cycling-related activities. And we've tried to make it broad enough that it also includes that of meetings and things that we know will take place throughout the year for a bicycle club. The limit of liability, and this sometimes is important for clubs because you'll have maybe it's a governmental entity who will ask for a certificate of insurance and they want to make sure that you have proper limits. So under the general liability policy, there's $1 million each occurrence limit, which means that the policy will not pay more than $1 million for any one occurrence. So if you have 6 cyclists who are involved in one crash together, you have $1 million limit that applies for that particular occurrence if the club is to be named in the lawsuit as a result of that crash. The policy includes a $5 million general aggregate, which applies separately to each insured entity. That's really important because you want to make sure, you're purchasing coverage for your club, and we want to bring the group purchasing power to the table, but we also don't want to limit the coverage that you have as a club. And therefore, the separate general aggregate that applies only to the clubs is really only to your particular club. So for each insured entity, there's a separate $5 million general aggregate. The general aggregate, an example of when that comes into play, the $5 million per year, that is, in order to, exhaust that limit, you would have to have more than 5 $1 million occurrences, or more than 5 $1 million losses. So we've never had a situation where that $5 million has been breached, and so it is fairly significant with respect to making sure that your club has the proper coverage. Defense costs are in addition to the limit of liability, which means that regardless of the actual loss itself, the defense costs apply in addition to that. So let's take, for example, that you have a $2 million loss where $1 million is paid in indemnity, and then there's another $1 million in defense costs. The policy, even though it has $1 million each occurrence limit, will still pay that $2 million loss because it's paying the $1 million indemnity and then defense costs. So the defense costs are, in a sense, unlimited until that $1 million indemnity payment is made. And then there's a $5,000 sports equipment liability, which we had talked about, benefit, and it's subject to $1,500 per claim. A couple of important items to know with respect to general liability, and I promise that not all of the slides will take as long as the general liability section, but it probably is the most important for the club, so I want to provide as much information as possible. One, this is where the release of liability waivers come into play. They're definitely very important to protect your club, and we recommend that waivers are signed by your membership as well as your event participants, and you can find a sample on the website, the insurance purchasing website. Helmets are also recommended from an insurance and risk management perspective. So I know that there's not a requirement that's pushed down necessarily from the league. The league is not a rules-making organization, so we're just putting that out there as a recommendation solely from an insurance and risk management perspective based on some of the losses and claims that we've seen and the perception that the insurance industry has with this type of exposure. One enhancement that we made to the program this year is to add coverage, liability coverage for the non-competitive walking pieces of your cycling events. So the policy still is not designed to provide coverage for a 5K walk run or a duathlon or something like that, but we did receive a lot of calls from bike walk clubs who said, hey, you know, we have our weekly event and we have 5 people who cycle and we have 5 people who walk. We all meet at the same spot, we all leave at the same time, and we all meet up around the same time. And we consider that our walk event. If we're named in a lawsuit as a result of that, are we protected? Up until this year, we had to say no. So we wanted to expand the policy to provide coverage again for that non-competitive walking piece. Again, I can't stress enough that it is not, you know, coverage for a standalone 5K walk or a weekly meeting at the mall where we get together and walk. It's an event where the cycling activity has a non-competitive walking component. Just from a risk management perspective, we think that it is best for the cyclists to start before the walkers, just from the perspective of we don't want to create any more barriers for the cyclists to have to overcome during the cycling event. And then we added a small abuse and molestation benefit for each of the clubs. The limit is $25,000, so it's just enough to, if there was an allegation against someone in your club, that you can at least look into it with coverage under your policy. Probably the most notable, I would say, change that we made to the policy this year, and it really isn't a change in intent rather than just a change in the actual policy, is relative to mountain biking activities. Like I said in the beginning, the policy has never been designed to provide coverage for mountain biking clubs. Historically, what we have said is if you are a club and you have a few, or mountain biking is not a big part of your club, then you can still register to be a club member insured under this program. Where we became a little bit concerned is, one, the industry losses relative to mountain biking has really caused the insurance industry to restrict on being willing to provide coverage for mountain biking activities. And two, we don't, in insurance, we don't really like to be in the position where we are saying to you, if it's not a big part of your event or your club activities, there's coverage. But if it is a big part, there's no coverage. We like it to be more clear so that you know and can go into each activity knowing that you either have coverage or you do not have coverage. So this year for mountain biking activities, again, the intent is consistent with expiring, but if your club offers 3 mountain biking club rides or less, there will be an additional premium of $100 to take into consideration that increased exposure that has not been contemplated in the past. If your club has more than 3 mountain biking club rides, you are going to be what we're going to call kicked out of the underwriting or the automatic online purchasing website, so that we can look at the exposure individually and determine whether or not it fits under the league's insurance program. Additionally, for mountain biking activities, helmets and release of liability waivers will be required in order for the club to have coverage under the general liability policy for mountain biking claims. And lastly, cross-country and trail rides are the type of mountain biking exposures that we're comfortable picking up under the league's insurance program. A couple of other things, we talked about what is covered. I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about what is not covered, which includes racing, for-profit tours, rentals or bike share programs, commercial bike or repair shops, year-round bike depot exposures, construction or engineering of bike trails, certain alcohol-related activities or losses. We recommend that if you're going to have alcohol at your event that you reach out to our team, and our contact information will be at the end of this presentation to talk through whether or not additional coverage is needed. And then certain mountain biking activities, and then organizing and supervising a walking, biking school bus. So again, these are not new, but we always want to take the opportunity to talk about not only what is covered, but what is not covered so that you can make your decision relative to your club activities. A couple of quick facts relative to the general liability losses. I'd like to share with you all, as you are all insured under this policy, the types of losses or how the program is performing, just so that you have a sense for where we are from an insurance perspective when we determine rates and things like that. So we have roughly 2 general liability claims each policy year, which, when you think about it, is a really small number of claims, but there's a huge potential for a very large loss. You know, when I say that's a small number of claims, if you think about the number of clubs on, especially on a summer day when every state, you know, is able to get out and cycle at the same time, and we have 682 clubs, and then you multiply that by 10 members who are on their weekly ride, it's really amazing, you know, that how few general liability claims we have. The unfortunate part is that the losses that we have are very, very expensive. We have losses that have resulted in fatalities and head injuries and paralysis, so those tend to cost a lot of money from a general liability perspective, even if the club does everything it should with respect to release liability waivers and looking at the course and making sure that everyone is safe and understands the risks. Unfortunately, when something bad happens, it's not unlikely for the injured party to bring suit against the organizer, which in many cases is the club. So the 7-year undeveloped loss ratio is 115%. You might ask, what exactly does that mean? The real easy way to look at that is that for every dollar that the insurance company has collected in premium, they've paid $1.15 out in losses. So the insurance industry, like many industries, is in the business to you know, be successful, and so the insurance companies have said to us, we really need some rate correction on this account because we can't continue to pay $1.15 in losses for every dollar that we collect in premium. We are paying you to offer this insurance program. So you'll see some rate correction in the rates that we talk about here in a few minutes. Some of the claims that represent the greatest exposure, collisions between cyclists and pedestrian, cyclists struck by a vehicle. This was a really tough summer relative to that type of injury and loss and exposure. And then there's also the single bicycle crash. And those are the types of losses, unfortunately, that are probably the most frequent, but also have the highest tendency to have a large sum associated with a claim. We do have a few property damage liability claims, and again, as a reminder, those are those little, you know, we were using someone's facility and we caused damage to it, but to date, they've represented a pretty small portion of the overall losses. So we've been talking about, up to this point, third-party liability coverage if the club is sued as a result of a club activity, and that's your general liability policy. But I do want to switch gears here for a second to the excess accident medical policy. And this is the policy that's in place to provide excess medical coverage for accidental injuries that occur during a club ride or a club activity. There's also a small accidental death and dismemberment benefit. Members of your insured clubs and first-time invited guests are all covered under this policy, as well as registered participants and volunteers of special events. And then your attendees of your bicycle education courses are also covered under the policy. The policy has a $10,000 per person per accident limit, and so it's not designed to be an all-encompassing policy, but it's designed to help offset the cost of out-of-pocket expenses that your club members may face as a result of an injury during a club activity. The coverage is subject to a $500 deductible, and you'll see here that we've noted that it's a disappearing deductible, which means that if your insurance company has paid $500 out in claims, then that can be used to satisfy your deductible under the policy. So we're not looking to really, hit you twice with a deductible here, again, because this policy is designed to help offset those out-of-pocket expenses up to the $10,000 per person limit. And it's excess over any other valid and collectible insurance, which includes your personal health care insurance that you carry. And that's really how you control the losses on this policy. If you were to provide coverage on a primary basis, you probably wouldn't even be able, we wouldn't be able to secure this coverage for you as an organization. A couple of notes on the excess accident medical losses. Injuries range anywhere from minor injuries to catastrophic. We talked about some of those where there's paralysis that obviously would fall into the catastrophic category. And then your minor injuries, you might have something, very, very minor and resulting from a club activity. About 94 to 96% of our claimants have other insurance. So again, a way that we can control your losses and be able to offer this benefit to your membership. We have about 125 claims per year, and in recent years the average payment is about $1,700 per claim. And with the excess accident medical, you guys are running more at a 90% loss ratio, which is, from an insurance perspective, not great, but it's a lot better than on the general liability side, where for every dollar the insurance company is collecting in premium, they're only paying 90 cents out in losses. So rate correction a little bit needed there, but not as drastic as the GL policy. So wanted to talk a little bit about how you purchase the coverage, and we still are going to talk about the rates here. And going through this out loud, I think I probably should have changed these slides around, but we will again offer the purchasing website of www.amerstech.com/LAB, and there you will be able to purchase your annual coverage for your year-round exposures, and also schedule your special events when that time comes. Special event premium, like I said before, that special event is an event where a fee is being charged for the event, and that premium is based on the number of participants, and it's paid after the event is over. So you'll go back in once you've had your event and put the number of participants. Again, we don't want to count our existing members in that participation figure, and then you will be there will be a charge, and you'll move forward with that fee, paying that premium. Coverage begins at the time of payment on the general liability and participant accident coverage. The new policy takes effect on February 1st. So once the purchasing website goes live, which it is not currently live, once it goes live, if you purchase coverage today, your policy will go into effect on February 1st. We wanted to provide a little bit of an extension for those current insured clubs who are renewing coverage. We're having the call here on January 25th. We're going to go live with the purchasing website tomorrow, January 26th, and we know that's a pretty tight timeline of February 1st to turn around and get your club insurance purchased. So we have been able to have the insurance companies agree to ensure that there's not a lapse in coverage as long as a current insured purchases coverage, renews their coverage by February 15th. If you are a new club considering this coverage, or a club considering this coverage for the first time, then your policy would go into effect the date that you purchase coverage. So if you don't currently have coverage through the league and you have a and you purchase coverage on February 13th, your effective date will be February 13th, and your end date for the coverage will be February 1st of 2018. Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about club costs. So for your bicycle clubs, again, for bicycle clubs, the premium is derived by the number of members, and it's subject to a minimum premium of $208 per club. So last year we had quite a few clubs who fell into that minimum premium category. So if you do fall into that minimum premium category, then your premium would be $208 for the base coverage, and that's before you start adding on some different coverages if needed, such as mountain biking or bike education or rental refurbishment, things like that. So the rate for the first 1,000 members is $4.16, and then you have a bit of a discount based as resulting from volume if you have more than 1,000 participants. For advocacy organizations, for those who do not have a club or a social ride, the annual policy premium is going to be $130. Again, if you tell us on your application, which is online, that you do not have club or social rides, participant accident coverage or excess accident medical coverage will not apply to those events. If you are an advocacy organization who offers club rides or social rides, but you offer less than 26 or fewer rides per year with less than 50 average riders in each ride, then your annual premium will be $215, and the reason for the increase over the $130 is because we're adding the excess accident medical coverage that we just talked about if you're having rides. There are some one-off premiums that only apply to those clubs who have the exposure. So if you rent, lease, or own year-round office space and you need coverage for your landlord, that annual premium is $108. And again, if you look at that kind of independent of the league's insurance program, it would be really, really, really difficult for any business to be able to secure a general liability policy to cover their business office for $108. So it looks like a big number, but when you look at it from the perspective of what it's covering, I think it is a very competitive option that the league's put together for its clubs. If your club organizes bicycle education courses, you have the option to purchase coverage for those exposures. We do give a break for those clubs who use only LCIs as instructors. So your premium, if it's classroom only, is going to be $68 per year, and if it's classroom and on bike instruction, that premium is $196. The premium is higher if you offer the education, but you're not able to use all LCI instructors. So $91 to $261, depending on whether or not on bike is included. Bicycle refurbishment, again, another optional coverage is $131. Your mountain biking, we've already talked about that with at $100. Your special event premium, there was a bump here as well. And if we look at the 0 to 1,000 members in your special event, the per participant rate is $4.54, and coverage is subject to, or the policy is subject to a minimum premium of $233. We're going to look at a little bit of a comparison here, which I think will help put things into perspective for you. So this is a rate change summary over expiring. So for the club rates, one way to look at the rates for 2017 is that it is, worst case scenario, going to be 63 cents per member higher than expiring. If you have, again, this is based on 1,000 members, so if you have more than 1,000 members, that rate change is going to be a little lower. And then the minimum premium for the policy for clubs is $208, and the difference, that's a difference of $34 in minimum premium from last year. So advocacy organizations, with rides, your annual premium is going to be $215, which is about $26 higher than expiring. Advocacy organizations with no rides is the premium is going to be $130 for your annual operations, subject to the exclusions that we've talked about already this evening, and the change is about $17 per club on an annual basis. Your special events, this again is based on the first 1,000 writers, and that increase is about 71 cents per writer. Again, we don't want to include our club members in that number when we're reporting it. We also have an increase in the minimum premium for special events of about $42 more than expiring. I wanted to talk a little bit about a new fee that's on here this year, and it's the annual admin fee. This is the fee that we are putting in place. You know, there's a lot of work the league puts into the development of a competitive insurance program. They put a lot of work into negotiating terms and conditions with us, beating us up during the renewal time, if you will, making sure that they're able to offer their membership a really, really valuable and great insurance product, which we feel confident that the league is doing. We've looked at some different organizations and what their admin fee is, and it really ranges anywhere from, you know, $30 to $150. So there's going to be a $35 one-time per year fee for the clubs, advocacy organizations and clubs, of $35. So you'll see that in addition to what we've talked about here this evening when you go online to purchase your insurance coverage. So we talked so far about the coverages that are provided under the base policies that the league puts together for you. The optional coverages that I wanted to talk about, and I'm hoping to be able to wrap up fairly quickly because I do want to leave time for questions. We have a lot of questions coming in, so if you want to start in the order that we can. Oh, okay, so sorry about that. We'll make sure that we get through the questions. So the non-owned and hired auto liability policy is a policy that's designed to provide protection to the club for losses arising out of the use of a vehicle on the club's behalf. So let's think about, like, if you're renting a vehicle from Hertz, if you're traveling for your club and you rent a vehicle from Hertz, or you're using your own personal vehicle, and you know, what if the club itself is sued as a result of an automobile accident? And this is the policy that would step in and provide coverage in the event of an auto loss. That, again, it's an optional coverage. There's a separate underwriting process that you go through. So if you're interested in that type of coverage, which we actually think that probably every club has the exposure. Probably every club has an exposure where they have somebody running to the post office for them, or they have someone picking up water for a club ride, or they have someone who is driving the course to check for hazards. So we think that the majority of clubs have this exposure. I think for the clubs who have purchased the coverage, it's really based on your individual exposure, but some of the premiums range anywhere from like $125 to like $400. So that's the type of premium that you would be looking at potentially, unless you have much more exposure than those who we're looking at currently, to cover you for a lawsuit where the club or one of your directors or an employee is named in a lawsuit as a result of an automobile accident. Directors and officers liability, we talked about the fact that they are covered. Your directors and officers are covered under the general liability policy for bodily injury, property damage, and personal and advertising injury. They are not covered for the wrongful acts of the board. So, for example, discrimination, wrongful termination, mismanagement of funds, or negligence in decision making. So an example would be, let's say that I'm a member of your club and you say, you know, Gina, you're not invited back to our club meetings, and you're not invited to go on our club rides. And I bring suit against your club for a discrimination. You discriminated against me. That's where the directors and officers liability would come into play. Or if I am a club member and I say to the directors, you know what, I really feel like you're doing a poor job with the management of the funds that you're collecting to raise awareness about alternative transportation, and as a result, I have, you know, been wronged, and now I'm going to sue each one of you board members, and I'm going to sue the club. So that's an example of when the directors and officers liability policy would come into play. And you have the ability to purchase the directors and officers liability coverage online on the purchasing website. The premium is $550 for $1 million limit, plus a $25 group purchasing fee, and $850 for a $2 million limit, plus a $25 group purchasing fee. So just in terms of kind of knowing what your colleagues are doing, we talked about earlier, we have about 220 of your colleagues who are purchasing the directors and officers liability policy. And this coverage, while the purchasing website for your club activities, for your GL and your PA are not currently available, you can go online now to purchase your directors and officers liability coverage, or to even get a quote. If you wanted to get a quote, you can print it off, share it with your board members, and make a decision. So I encourage you to look at that. There's some other claims examples on there that might be helpful for you. Wanted to talk just briefly about coverage for LCIs and seminar coaches coverage. The general liability policy, as I talked about before, provides coverage during smart cycling seminars and classes conducted in accordance with the league's procedures. The coverage applies automatically. You don't have to apply for the coverage. You don't have to ask for coverage on the website. And if you are an LCI and you need proof of insurance, you can request that from American Specialty. And I'm going to leave our contact information up here so that you can see it. And we will start combing our way maybe through some of the questions here. Kevin, I don't know if, while I glance at the questions, if you have anything to add or any additional information that you want to share.
No, this has been great. Again, thank you for leading this. If you do have questions, anyone, about your membership status, again, feel free to email me, kevin@bikeleague.org. I'm happy to answer your membership status questions and other general questions. But no, yeah, keep go on.
Okay, so I'm just going to run through some of these questions. There was some questions about, what does the insurance coverage cover and how much is it? I think we've covered that. A question about whether or not the members have to sign a new release of liability waiver annually. So the policy does not require the annual signing of a release of liability waiver. I always think it's a good idea, if it's manageable from an administrative perspective, to have that updated once a year, because you never know what has changed, or I know I've belonged to different groups where I'm like, what did I do when I signed up? So it's a good time, if they do an annual membership, to go ahead and have a new waiver signed if possible. This is a good question relative to what type of insurance do we need as a bike club. We host group rides all summer long, 6 days a week, but we have no facilities. Our bank account is our only asset. We need insurance to protect our board members and our officers from potential lawsuits. So for that club, I would say that you need to look into not only the general liability coverage as a club, not an advocacy organization, because it sounds like you have more than 26 rides a year, but as a club for general liability losses, and also your directors and officers liability for the wrongful acts. So if you were forced with making a decision, I really can't help you with that, because I'm not smart enough to know what you're going to be sued for, whether it's going to be a bodily injury claim or a wrongful act, but I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline and maybe even assist with putting something together for your board to look at, because I honestly feel that both coverages are equally important. If you were looking for insurance coverage for your SAG drivers, you would need a separate policy that we've talked about, the non-owned and hired automobile liability coverage. Is that right, Rene? Correct. I'm going to actually throw this question out to the group here sitting with me. I failed to tell you that I have, who many of you talk to every day, because it's, you know, not me. I have a whole team of individuals who get to help answer questions, but I have Christy Emschweiler here with me, and Rene Waterson, and Rochelle Stearns. And so for the special event count, do we need to count non-member volunteers?
No, it's only participants on the ride that you would need to count.
Okay.
For the purposes.
So for the purposes of scheduling your special event, you would only count your participants, not your non-member volunteers. Over what period does the general aggregate limit apply? That's a 12-month period, so it's your annual policy. Or if you were to purchase coverage midterm, it would be a 6-month period of time. So it's from February 1st, 2017 to February 1st, 2018. Again, I'm going to throw this out to the group. If the club is having only members attend, but there is an additional fee to help cover the costs of the event, is the special event coverage required?
It is not. If
Okay.
it's just for your club members and there's a fee charged, we consider it a club activity. There's no additional premium due.
Okay, and that's a nominal fee that helps offset the cost of putting the event on.
Right.
Okay. There's a question about whether or not waivers can be signed digitally, or if we need to actually have hard copies. And so a couple of things to remember with your electronic waivers is whatever resource you're using to collect those release liability waivers, it's important that they are able to recreate the waiver if you need it. So we have a claims example outside of the league's insurance program, but just in our business, where the insured used a third party for release liability waivers to be signed, but then when there was an actual claim and they need to reproduce it, the third party was not able to do that. So we want to make sure you're using a reputable company, or you have a good system for collecting and storing those and keeping them on hand for at least the statute of limitations in your state. What triggers a club ride? Posted on a calendar or communicated to membership?
I think it can be either way.
A club ride is going to be any ride that you get together and you open up to your membership and you ride together as a group on behalf of the club. So that would be considered a club ride. Equipment loss, they've asked for some elaboration on the $1,500 deductible. So again, your sports equipment loss is going to be if you are borrowing some type of sports equipment. Is it a bike corral, for example?
Yeah, a bike corral.
A bike corral would be a good example, and something happens to that bike corral, you have coverage for that liability since you don't own it, but you borrowed it or rented it from someone, but it's subject to a $1,500 deductible. So again, remember, if you are looking at property that falls within that deductible, so you're using handheld radios, for example, the $1,500 deductible is going to probably be higher than the actual claim for the loss of the handheld radio. There was a question on why are members and only a first-time guest covered. So if a non-member guest joins a second ride and gets hurt, we are not covered. The idea there is that once as a first time, if you want to come and give it a try, we want to make sure that you're protected so that you have a good experience. If you come back the second time and third time and weekly, we think at that point you should be a member of the club. And you still would have coverage as a member of the club, but that's what constitutes being an actual non-member versus a member. There's a question about errors and omissions coverage, and that might be a good one if you have the opportunity, if you want to reach out to me separately. Errors and omissions coverage a lot of times is for professionals. So an example would be a physician has a medical malpractice policy, an attorney has an employed lawyer's policy. Some errors and omissions claims can be covered under a directors and officers liability policy because it covers the errors and omissions of your directors and officers. So we might need a little more information on that particular question to be able to answer it. If a club offers a bicycle safety class, is there an additional cost?
They just make sure they take out the education coverage, right? Safety. Yes.
So with your bicycle safety classes, how it was sent in, you would have coverage for that if you, when you're going through the application process and the renewal process, that you answer yes, you offer bicycle education. And then again, if you're using all LCIs, you have a lower rate than a education course where you are not using all LCIs. For education coverage, if courses are open to members only, do we need to pay for the coverage? In the past, we have not had to, is what they said.
I don't think they have, actually,
okay.
To be honest, and we might want to confirm that with the underwriter to make sure that applies.
Let us circle back on that particular question. That's a really great question. I think that the idea for the education and the additional premium is that that applies when it's open to individuals outside of the club membership, with the idea that the education for our club members is already contemplated under the annual exposure, but we'll check on that and get back to you. There is a question about the $35 admin fee, and is it a new fee this year? It is a new fee. It's one that is new for 2017. There was a question about whether or not a vehicle that was borrowed by a club member but not owned by the club be covered under the non-owned and hired automobile liability policy. The answer to that is yes, but remember, you don't have non-owned and hired automobile liability coverage unless you reach out to us and go through the written application process. Okay, let me just look and see what other questions we have here. Like I said, we are trying to record the session, so if we were successful in that, which unfortunately I have not always been successful, we will make sure that it is distributed to the folks who are on the call this evening, and also I think in the past we've been able to post it to the League's website.
Yeah, we are recording tonight, and yes, this will be posted to the League's website along with this presentation. There are a bunch of people that weren't able to get in because we filled up, which is good and bad, I guess. But you will get an email in the next 5 or 6 days, I believe it's set, with all of this information. But in the meantime, feel free to check out amrespec.com/LAB as the policy website.
Okay, so we have clarification already on the education piece, and I apologize for the delay there. But if you are offering education to only your club members, you do not have to purchase the additional education coverage in order to have coverage for that exposure. So the only time you need to purchase the additional education coverage is if you're opening that up to non-members. So there was a question about whether or not individuals are covered if they're on an individual ride and not a club ride. The policy is designed to provide coverage for those club rides that are supervised and organized by the club. So the answer to that would be no, that individual would not be covered. Yes, LCIs paid and non-paid are both covered under the general liability policy. Thank you for bearing with us as we go through the questions. Hopefully, if one person has questions, someone else might be as well. Okay, so with respect to mountain biking, there's a question on whether or not you would be covered for mountain biking if you do 2 or 3 a month. And the answer to that is that that would need to be individually reviewed by the underwriter. It's not something that you would be able to secure coverage for through the online application process.
And to piggyback on Gina's question with that, you will be able to go online and start your application, and the application will notify us electronically for the underwriting review on the additional mountain biking exposure.
That's a great point, Christy. So then you can expect a contact either by phone or email from Rene or Christy. There's a question about whether or not we think that offering property insurance for the clubs as an add-on in 2018 is a possibility. Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. It's not one that we've had in the past, but it's one that I think we can look into. Give us a call if you're a club and you are looking for coverage for your property. We can certainly see what we can do to help you out. And depending on the level of interest, maybe it makes sense to add it onto the purchasing website in the future. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. There's a question about the grace period of February 15th of 2017 and whether or not that applies to the general or the directors and officers liability policy. The answer is no. You should have received already an email twice to renew your directors and officers liability policy online. So that grace period does not apply to the directors and officers liability coverage. So there's a question from a large club who says that, you know, it's not real easy to track whether or not you have a first-time rider at your event, your club ride, or if they've been there, you know, one other time 6 months ago. I think that what we are asking for you to do is to make sure that you have a protocol for registering your membership, counting your membership when you purchase your annual premium, and do your very best to be able to track whether or not it's a first-time rider. Will there be coverage for the club itself if there's a loss? Yes, I think there's coverage for the club itself. But what we want to make sure of is that we know who's on our rides and that they're controlled and that we're supervising those and doing our best to have a protocol in place. There's a question about how long should we hang on to waivers. At least the statute of limitations in your state. So I would ask if you have a legal representative on your, as a member of your club, they might have some input on, for your state, what is the statute of limitations. If you have a minor, you'll want to hang on to that waiver until the minor reaches the age of majority, plus the statute of limitations in your state. Rene, I'm going to toss this over to you and Christy. Family memberships?
For a family membership, you count as 2 for the purposes of purchasing insurance.
Okay, so for a family membership, you count 2 members for the purposes of purchasing insurance. Oh, someone just brought up the ability to purchase additional excess liability coverage through American Specialty. That is still available as an optional coverage. So if you have an entity who requires you to have excess coverage, or you just want to have additional coverage because you know that the exposure is great and you want to make sure that your club is protected for years to come, You can purchase either a standalone excess liability policy that applies only to your club, or you have the ability to purchase coverage on a policy that is shared with other members, member clubs, as well as the league, and that premium is closer to like $500 annually. So, Kevin, with that, I think we've gone over about 10 minutes. I think we've gotten through most of the questions. We will look through the questions, and if we didn't reach out to you or address your question during the call, we will certainly circle back with you and try to get your question answered. We encourage everyone to reach out to our service team if you have questions. Again, as a reminder, we will be notifying all of the current insureds as well as, I think, other league club members, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, that the purchasing website is up and ready to go. But we'll definitely keep you in the loop with that as much as we can. With that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Like Gina said, questions, insurance can go to the team here at American Specialty. Thank you, team, for doing this. This has been super, super helpful. I hope everyone you'll agree. Again, if you have membership questions, reach out to me, kevin@bikeleague.org. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Gina, unless you have anything else to add, I think we'll wrap up from here.
Okay, very good. Have a great night, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.